First of all, welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. I'll just start by introducing everyone to begin with. So my name is Jane Young. I'm with Smartway 2. My background is really a mixture of startups and blue chip companies, consulting in change and communication, particularly digital transformation and social business strategy for brands like 3M and Hiscox. I've also done a lot of speaking around the world for organisations like Cisco and Deloitte and Gartner and Pfizer, mostly around the future of work topics and just helping people think differently about change. So today I'm here with Martin Hiles, the founder of Smartway 2. Martin has over 30 years of software experience, and he sold his previous company, BusinessSolve, to PeopleCube before starting Smartway 2. And Martin's vision is really all about using the latest cloud and smartphone technology to revolutionise the way people book rooms, desks, and everything else they need to be productive at work. So today we're here to talk through some scenarios for planning a safe return to work. In terms of an agenda, we'll briefly start off by touching on the layers of variables that make this a complex situation to manage. Then we'll go through 7 scenarios: managing who comes in when, how to ensure priority workers get what they need, how to enable people to self-certify that they're well enough to come in, ways to make the employee journey smoother in terms of parking, checking in when they arrive at the office, how to do contact tracing in the event that someone falls ill. And finally, we'll finish up by looking at the importance of a flexible, data-driven approach so that you can adapt on the fly as and when regulations and circumstances change. So let's jump right in. Say, to keep the maths simple, you have an office of 1,000 people. And you've worked out that taking social distancing into account, you can accommodate 25% of them. So that's 250 people. Do you bring 250 people back full time? Do you bring 500 people back, so half the workforce, half the time? Do you bring everyone back for a quarter of the time? There are endless possibilities. And the devil is in the detail, because many organisations are looking at things like staggering shifts to avoid crowding at entrances and elevators. And you might need to allow extra time for cleaning and various other considerations. And then there's the question of which individuals get priority. Do you try to work out in advance whose jobs are most critical? On what basis? Or do you consider who is least equipped to work from home? Or is it more about who wants to come in versus who doesn't? And why? And how do you find out why? Do you manage capacity top down or with an element of first come, first serve? Then there's the question of how will you manage the workflow around approving and declining requests to come into the office? And can you manage all this manually, or do you need to automate the process? So this is not an easy puzzle to solve when you get into the weeds. There are many nuances to every individual employee's circumstances that often need to be taken into account in order to make informed decisions. So one way to reduce this complexity is by taking a bottom-up approach. In other words, you ask employees to book their workstation in the office in advance. In terms of how the top-down piece fits in, because obviously you need governance and control to keep people safe. When you ask everyone to book their desk in the office in advance, this gives you the opportunity to automate the process, to predefine rules in the system for accepting and declining these requests. It also enables you to interject at various points in that workflow with feedback loops that allow you to gather data to help you manage the situation more smoothly. Because ultimately, what we're trying to do is not only protect our people, which is the number one priority, but also optimize productivity, collaboration, and employee experience in an unpredictable, ever-changing situation. Could you manage all this manually? Organizations we're talking to say there's just no way to do it, even if you only had a couple of hundred desks. Not only is it logistically impossible, but you also wouldn't get the benefits of data. So automating your back to work enablement generates data that not only helps you make better, faster decisions as you adapt your strategies, but also does things like enable contact tracing. So for those reasons, today we'll focus on scenarios that can be handled by automated systems. And hopefully this will spark some ideas that you'll find useful as you're thinking about how to implement strategies specific to your workplace, depending on the type of work you do, the size of your organization, the location, and even the culture in your organization, which also has a bearing. So let's get back to our office of 1,000 people that's at 25% capacity for social distancing. And I'll just show you how a few scenarios might pan out. Scenario 1, managing who comes in when. Here you have Bob and Sue. They're working from their respective homes and they decide to book desks in the office for next week. When they go to make their bookings, they're prompted to provide a reason why they want to come in. Bob selects, I miss having social contact with colleagues, while Sue selects, I need access to a printer to do my job. In this case, Bob's booking is automatically declined, and he's sent a message asking him to contact a support line that can help. Meanwhile, Sue's booking is accepted pending approval from her manager. This is Jill. She manages Sue and Bob. Jill approves Sue's request. Seeing as the system is gathering data on all these requests to come in, Jill can see reports that reveal something that catches her attention. It turns out that half of their team want to come into the office for exactly the same reason. They need to do a lot of printing and they don't have the equipment they need at home. So Jill decides to get them the specific equipment they are lacking. She organises for printers to be sent to each team member's home so they can be productive remotely and the desks they wanted to occupy in the office can be freed up for others to use. Meanwhile, Jill's reports show that 20% of people who want to come back into the office are keen to come in for the same reason as Bob, because they miss social contact. She shares this insight with colleagues and they start coming up with new ideas to address the problem. Soon they've implemented virtual coffee mornings and extra training on mental health and wellness. So this scenario captures 3 key points. Number 1, that the easiest way to control who comes in when is having everyone book what they need well in advance and automating the process of accepting, declining and approving these bookings. Number 2, that using automatic custom notifications, you can provide people with all the information they need, whether their booking is accepted, declined, where to get help, or for a manager to see whether they have team members' bookings waiting for their approval. This ability to dish out information is really important during a crisis because crisis management, or in fact, any change management, hinges on the quality, frequency, and consistency of communications. And number 3, collecting data from individuals at the point they request to come into the office provides you with insights to inform your strategy so you can make adjustments on the fly to improve colleague safety and, despite challenging circumstances, strive for the best employee experience possible. So these core capabilities in this type of scenario help you to better manage occupancy so you can utilize space effectively and protect people as and when they transition back to the office. Okay, scenario number 2, prioritizing essential workers. Say you've decided to give priority to certain key workers. How do you make sure they can always get access to the office when they need it? Let's look at an example. This is Paul. Paul and Sue normally share a 2-person office on the 3rd floor, but due to social distancing rules, only one of them is allowed in there at a time. Because Sue's already booked her desk, Paul can't book his, despite the fact he's classified as an essential high-priority worker. In this scenario, when Paul goes to book a desk, he's automatically prompted to instead book one in an overflow zone that's been specifically designated to high-priority workers. So he goes ahead and makes his booking in the overflow zone for next week. That takes us on to scenario 3, self-certification. Paul and Sue, as we've established, are approved to come into the office next week. But how do you certify near the time that they're well and they don't pose a risk to their colleagues before they show up? So let's take a look at how this could work. It's the day before Sue and Paul are due to come into the office. They're automatically sent a message asking them to self-certify. Paul confirms that he's free from symptoms, no fever, nothing like that, and he hasn't been in contact with anyone else who's experiencing symptoms either. Sue, on the other hand, hasn't been feeling well that day. Based on her response to the health check questions, her desk booking is automatically cancelled and she instantly gets a message with advice on what to do next. Jill, as her manager, also receives a message notifying her that Sue has a fever. At this point, Sue won't be able to make any further bookings until it's been confirmed that she's in good health and doesn't pose a risk to her colleagues. Meanwhile, Paul gets a notification saying his usual desk on the 3rd floor has now become available if he wants to book it. He confirms yes he does, and the desk he'd reserved in the overflow area is automatically cancelled and freed up for someone else to use. Scenario 4 is travelling to work. So Paul is keen to avoid public transport for obvious reasons, so he decides to book a parking space at the office from his mobile app. But the app says no, he can't book a parking space because he lives less than half a mile from the office. Still, he can't be bothered to walk, so instead he books a bike rack space so he can safely cycle to work and store his bike securely while keeping at a safe distance from his fellow cyclists. Scenario number 5, arriving at the office. So as an organisation, say you've agreed that it's a requirement for people to check in when they show up at the office, then check into a desk or room that they've pre-booked. You might insist on this because otherwise you'll have no way of tracking whether someone is actually showing up and what facilities they've actually used. And if you have no way of tracking this, you'll be unable to track space utilisation, you'll be unable to manage automated procedures around cleaning and sanitation, for instance, automatically taking desks out of service for 48 hours between uses, or requiring a cleaner to release a desk back into the booking pool after it's been sanitised. And of course, contact tracing relies on accurately measuring who has been where, using what, next to whom. So all that considered, you need Paul to check in when he arrives at the office. Yet you don't want him using touchscreens or walking up to someone at reception. Instead, using contactless location services, Paul is automatically checked in. When he gets into the office, Paul can see how the layout of the office has changed to keep him and his colleagues safe, with desks clearly marked as occupied, available, or blocked due to COVID-19. In fact, he might notice that there are more desks available this week than there were the previous week, and there's a specific reason for this. Say you're in a scenario where guidelines change and you decide to reduce your physical distancing radius, perhaps from 2 metre to 1 metre. The last thing you want to do is have to start planning occupancy from scratch. Instead, you need the ability to change the physical distancing settings in your booking system so that when someone books a desk, all other desks within the new reduced or indeed increased radius will be taken out of service. Scenario number 6 is contact tracing. So halfway through the day, Paul gets a call from Jill with bad news. Apparently, Sue has tested positive for COVID-19. So how do you track, trace and isolate when someone falls ill? Hopefully this will not happen in your workplace, but given that all the booking data is available, Jill can run a report that identifies at-risk colleagues, categorising their risk level depending on their likely proximity to that person during a certain time period. It turns out that Paul is classified as high risk because he and Sue have shared an office within the past 7 days. So he's guided to seek medical help, isolate and follow the protocol that's in place to protect his colleagues. Finally, we have scenario 7, responding to change. We've already touched on the importance of quickly responding to changes in guidelines such as social distancing, but there are other changes that need to be easy to make. For example, luckily, Sue recovers well, but unfortunately, Paul tests positive and he's experiencing symptoms that are going to keep him off work for some time. As a result, Sue needs to cover some of his responsibilities, so her role changes and she's designated as an essential worker. In this scenario, as with any changes that happen day to day, week to week as the situation unfolds, flexibility and specifically automation that is flexible makes it easy to adapt on the fly. When Sue's role is updated, she's automatically given access to overflow zones for essential workers to ensure she can always access a desk in the office when she needs one. And the next time she goes to make a booking, she's asked for feedback on her experience the last time she was in the office, because it's really important to gather feedback not just once, not just in the early days, but continuously in order to keep improving when things are changing. So we've covered a great number of scenarios there, and I'm sure you can think of many more. For instance, what happens if you're aiming for 25% utilisation but find you're only getting 5%? Answers to questions like these rely on taking a data-driven approach so you can dive in and look at what lies beneath the surface. Yet data on its own isn't enough. You need to be able to spin up workflows, rules, custom notifications, and other means of automating processes in response to changes in your environment at short notice. And you want to do this not only quickly, but cost effectively. And therein lies the essence of agility. We've all been forced, all of a sudden, to create some kind of agile workplace here. Only instead of being driven by the business case around productivity and collaboration and employee experience,
we are being driven by the need to protect people's health as the #1 priority. And if we can do this while staying productive, staying collaborative, and giving our people a world-class experience within the constraints of the pandemic, then we're being the best that we can be. When we talk about agility, we often talk about flexibility, we talk about speed, but really it's about resilience. The reason you need to move quickly, the reason you need to remain flexible is in order to be resilient, to stay strong in the face of change. And a global pandemic is a sure test of how resilient you can be as individuals, as teams, as organizations, and as leaders. And this really comes down to the fact that this is not so much a technology challenge that we're facing today as it is a psychology challenge. Technology is the easy bit. We can have you up and running with this technology that does all this stuff and lots more in a matter of days. But people, on the other hand, do not adapt as easily as tools. That's why we believe that using flexible rules baked into technology is a great way of facilitating behavioral change. In other words, you can either tell people what to do and place the burden on them of following procedures to the letter and place the burden on managers to enforce these rules, or you can bake these procedures into your tools so that simply by using the tool, people naturally follow the protocol. So I hope that provides some food for thought. And I'd like to hand over to John, our CEO and moderator today, who'll help field your questions. And Martin is also on the line to help answer some of those too. So over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Jane, for the informative presentation. And I'd like to welcome everyone that's attending the webinar today. We would like to take your questions, and you can enter them into the chat function. And we'll be happy to address as many as we can over the next few minutes. So first question, maybe Martin, can you describe your rules engine in more detail?
Okay, the rules engine, it's JavaScript based, so it gives us a great deal of flexibility. We can trigger rules on a save, on a delete, or also on events such as check-in. And rather than just considering the rule as being something to prevent people from doing something that you don't want them to do, you should really view it as a way of enhancing the booking workflow. So, you know, someone's chosen this option, you could then go and set you know, a further set of options. And the rules are fully integrated with other areas of the system, such as custom fields that you can create, custom notifications that you may want to use to communicate with your user community, and also graphical layers. So, you know, when people think about rules, they think it's purely to stop you doing something. It's an awful lot more than that with SmartWay 2.
Yeah, great, Martin. Thank you. Jane, a number of questions around the webinar recordings. Maybe you can answer that one, please.
Yep, sure. Keep an eye on your inbox, and tomorrow we'll be sure to send you an email, and it'll have a link to the webinar video that you can share with your colleagues.
Yeah, a lot of questions around rules seem to be popping up, Martin. If you have multiple locations, can I have different rules per location?
Absolutely, you could have different rules for each individual desk if you wanted. Not that you would take it to that extreme, but yeah, absolutely no problem at all. And it's not just the rules. There's other things that you probably want to, you know, vary by location. Obviously, the contents of the email and in-app notifications, maybe, you know, the opening hours of the various facilities, the time periods for which you may wish to book. There's very, very few global settings in SmartWay 2, so, you know, view everything as being regional.
Yeah, great. Again, the presentation will be shared along with this Q&A session so that you can get that as well when you receive the link. There was a question around the 25%. Why 25%? I think that was just an arbitrary example. It could be whatever you want. Is there a link to visitor management? Martin?
Yeah, we have an off-the-shelf integration with ProxyClick by way of an example. So any attendees for meetings or visitors that you've booked desks for, if they're not part of your Active Directory, then they will be categorized as a visitor and passed to the visitor management system.
Who are your primary customers? HR, real estate, facility managers, all of the above. When you're introducing new, scheduling of desks, bringing people back to the office, we see HR and real estate and facilities and IT working together to put these systems together and roll out to the employee population. So. Question around, can you book conference rooms? Martin?
Yeah, absolutely. You can book any resource in SmartWay too, but obviously when dealing with conference rooms, it's likely that you will have some ancillary services as well, such as catering and audio visual, all of which are fully configurable in SmartWay too, and obviously the rules around the provision of such services.
The question around employee adoption of these new solutions that people are implementing. Martin?
Well, I have to say, I'm pleasantly surprised in the pandemic that user adoption, I would say, is an awful lot higher than when people were traditionally moving away from the one person, one desk into an agile working model. I think the key to it is to give some incentives, make it really easy for people to be able to book the resources they need and take them on the journey with you. We have had cases in the past where people have refused to install the mobile app on their personal phones, but over time people tend to weaken and they will go with it for the convenience.
Yeah, I might add to that, we see, probably 80+% of the bookings going through the mobile app, with a floor plan view. And so, since everyone's walking around with a smartphone, we see a high adoption, from the employees in that area. How is parking booking handled? Martin?
Yeah, well, the same way as you would book a desk, really. You're booking a specific resource. That resource may have definable attributes such as it's got an electric charging station. Maybe it's in an area where the garage is of limited height. Those sorts of attributes are all definable. And you probably want a custom form to collect suitable information about the booking. Maybe make, model, license plate number, color, that sort of thing. And you may want to put rules around the booking of parking spaces to incentivize people for good behavior. So if they book a space and they check in and they use it, then that may increase how far in advance they're allowed to book in order to be sure of securing a parking space. But yeah, no, it's no different to any other resource. Configure it for the workflow that you need.
Yeah, maybe the 3 or 4 questions just popped in maybe as a follow-up. Not all workstations are the same, and they're saying, can I, set up, different desks with different types of equipment? Maybe just add on to that, Martin, please.
Yeah, absolutely. You might have different styles of desks. You may have different equipment on each desk. We see this quite a lot currently, where people have been forced into desk booking, in order to ensure sort of safe social distancing in the workplace. And they've not had the luxury of going through an agile working transformation and having refurbed the office. So you might even have specifically allocated desks. So you can have different equipment on different desks that are owned by people, for example. So you allow people the flexibility to find and choose the desk that's right for them. And then SmartWay 2 can create an exclusion zone around that area to ensure that, you know, everyone's kept at a safe distance, despite them having that flexibility to choose whatever desk they wish.
You mentioned personal mobiles for bookings. Is there any restriction on the type of mobiles or the latest technology? So we run on both iOS and Android, so pretty much cover the marketplace from that point of view. Martin, they're asking another question around signage. Signage outside of conference rooms and on desks.
Yes, well, we have a meeting room panel app that's available in both the Android and the iOS app stores, and you can run that on any Apple or Android device. Although we do provide our own meeting room panels that have many benefits, not to mention a forward-facing dual-frequency card reader, which is the preferred method we find for people to check in. We have a similar device for the desk, but it's just a small 3.5-inch display. Looks like a bit like a sort of a coffee mug coaster. And also you might want to have some centralized signage, and we have via our API we can publish and update HTML pages, which you could run, you know, in the embedded browser of smart TV, so very inexpensive hardware, to advertise, you know, availability and what's going on around the building. So lots of options, you know, all interactive, updates in real time.
Yeah, a couple of follow-on questions to that, Martin, around, you know, how do you check meeting room occupancy? How do you check into desks and meeting rooms? Maybe talk about the various ways we can do that.
Sure. Look, there's lots of different ways of checking in, and it's at the end of the day, it's down to what level of control you want. So, for example, you can allow people to check in from the mobile app with or without verifying their location using location-based services. So, you know, maybe if they're more than 100 meters from the meeting room, you might not allow them to check in. That's entirely optional. You can allow people to check in from an interactive link in the email. So you can just email them and say your room's ready. Click here to check in. You can do it via the web. You could do it through the mobile app by scanning a QR code. Equally, there's contactless options. So you could scan an NFC tag or a Bluetooth beacon to give you a contactless experience. And, you know, if you're lucky enough to have a device with either you know, an RFID or an NFC card reader in there, chances are you'll be able to use the badge in the lanyard around your neck, either at the conference room panel or the desk panel. So it's all down to what technology you've got and the level of control you want to apply.
We've still got a number of other questions coming in. We can stay on for a little bit longer. Number of questions around costs and where can we access that. Our pricing model is based upon resources, not users. So the number of desks, the number of meeting rooms, the number of car parking spaces. You can reach back out and fill in the info on our website, and we will have somebody reach back out to you to get costs, or a couple of people asking how to get costs. A number of questions around how easy it is to administer the system, and, you know, who could that be? Martin, you want to tackle that one, please?
Yeah, we generally find that the system sits in the facilities arena. But what I would say is once the system's configured, unless you want to implement any kind of change, i.e., you know, you want to add additional rooms or desks or change a layout, the system really does look after itself. There is no regular maintenance required, you know, other than what we obviously do within the hosted environment, where we take care of all the backups, etc., for you. So really, you know, once the system's configured, unless you want to implement some kind of change, there's no day-to-day maintenance required by you guys.
question around, does the system integrate with Outlook?
Yes, it does. In the Microsoft app stores, or whatever they call it these days, there is an app that can be downloaded and installed. The integration is actually done using Exchange Web Services. So if the Exchange administrator, regardless of whether it was an on-premise Exchange or Office 365, if the Exchange administrator downloads that app and installs it using his admin account, then the add-in automatically becomes available to everyone on that domain, regardless of whether they're using, Outlook for Windows, Outlook for Mac, and even Outlook Web Access. So there's absolutely nothing that needs to be deployed to individual workstations.
So some follow-up around that, a number of questions around how easy it is to change things, like on the kiosk view, on the notifications, changing of neighborhoods. There's 4 or 5 questions around that, so maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. You have access to all the administration tools that we would use to originally configure the system for you. Now within there's templates for email and in-app notifications. So you can choose what wording you want to include, what data from the actual reservation that you want to include in that. And even if you go as far as creating custom fields to collect additional data, you can then include those into those notifications. For things like neighborhoods, you would generally configure that as a custom field against the desks. So you'd say these desks belong to, these teams, if you like. And obviously your individual user accounts that you'll probably sync with Active Directory in most organizations, you just associate those members with additional SmartWay 2 groups so you know what neighborhoods they're in. I've probably made that sound more complicated than it actually is, but it can be hard to visualize when you've just got audio.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. What is the booking program called? It's, our software is called SmartWay 2, just like the name of the company. Any experience of linking with NHS Mail? That's something that's on the early 2021 roadmap, so it'll be coming out shortly. Talking about, do we need digital CAD files of office space to use the software? Martin, you want to take that, please?
Hey, I'm very fussy with floor plans. I like them to be very crisp and clean and clutter-free. So if you've got CAD files, by all means share them with us, so then we can switch layers off if they're a little bit noisy. But if you haven't got CAD files, don't worry. We can work with any file that is viewable through, a Windows browser. So, quite often PNGs, some clients even give us PDFs, but JPEGs, GIF files, we work with them all.
Yeah, great. A couple of questions around sensors. We've done some integration with a few sensor vendors, one that FreeSpace, based in the UK, that has a global presence. And so if you want to track utilization down to the individual desk level or area level, we have integrations that exist already, or you can use our API and, we could integrate with anybody's, the various sensor vendors that are around the globe. So pretty flexible there. Also questions around integrations to other space or floor management systems. Again, the same thing. We'll be releasing an interface with SaraView space management in Q1 for a client, and again, we have an open API, and as long as there's a decent API on the other side, we can connect to that, via our API. So lots of flexibility on integration, with our application. Maybe we have time for one more. Can reservations get added as demand grows? One floor fills up, the next floor becomes available, and so on. Martin?
Yeah, that's actually quite a common usage that we've been seeing for many years now, where you sort of direct people to a floor. When that floor gets to a certain capacity, you open up the next floor, and the benefits of that approach here, are quite obvious in cost savings, I would suggest.
Yep, I think that we've covered, I mean, a lot of duplicate questions, but I think we've answered them in some shape or fashion, a lot around rules. I think Martin's given you some pretty extensive detail around rules and configuration and how easy it is to support and administer the system. So with that, we would like to thank you all for attending, and we appreciate your interaction and the great questions that you've answered. And please reach out, and we're happy to provide you a customized demo and a proposal to how we could help you bring your employees back to work in a safe manner. Thanks again to Jane for the presentation and for Martin answering questions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye now.